another episode of It's Your History Too, brought to you by the Howard County Historical Society. And again today with me, and guess what? It's the same day. This is Randy Smith, curator with the Howard County Historical Society. We just took off our shirts. Maybe you'll get to see it, maybe you won't. But hey, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your favorite topic. I can tell you it is, because every time we put a picture or a video or even mention a restaurant's name, you guys go nuts for it. So we're going to talk about restaurants, specifically restaurant firsts in Howard County.
Yes.
Well, let's hit the first one.
Well, we'll just go in chronological order. The first restaurant, first-ish, in Kokomo was Kentucky Fried Chicken. It was started by Darrell Gillum. He met up with Colonel Sanders in 1954 down in Indy. Colonel Sanders was selling his Kentucky Fried Chicken through a restaurant down there. It wasn't branded a Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant, but the guy who owned it was selling it through his restaurant. So Darrell Gillum decided, I would like to sell some of that. It's really good chicken. So what he did, Gillum, is he got the stuff from Colonel Sanders and then started putting it in his restaurant called Gillum's. It was still called Gillum's, but he was selling this Kentucky Fried Chicken. Colonel Sanders actually came into the restaurant and replaced Gillum's placemats with Kentucky Fried Chicken placemats and all that kind of stuff, and kind of branded almost Gillum's as a Kentucky Fried Chicken. However, the first official Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant was not opened in Kokomo until 1961.
Okay.
It was open in the little strip mall on Markland that is behind the smoke shop that used to be a Dairy Queen for people who were old enough to remember. So this will be around
the Union Street, Home Avenue area?
Yes. You're going to see a better picture later, but here's a picture of it when it opened from our collection. You'll see a better picture in the show. But he made $117,000 in his first year of having a Kentucky Fried Chicken. He ended up with 3 in town. And he was a personal friend of Colonel Sanders.
Okay.
At one point, one of Gillum's sons dressed up as Colonel Sanders for Halloween at school.
Oh, we've never done that before, huh? Yeah.
Colonel Sanders actually lent Darrell Gillum's son one of his, for lack of a better term, uniforms.
Okay, well.
The white suit he would wear with the black ribbon tie.
I can't say I had a game worn, okay? That's a little much. Yeah.
But we actually have a Colonel Sanders uniform in our collection, too, that Darrell Gillum gave us.
That's pretty cool. Is it on display or is it in archive?
It is not currently on display. It is in storage right now. Part of the issue with that, to change the subject just slightly, is as a museum, we have to be careful with how long we have certain types of things on exhibit, because the light can damage it, temperature extremes can damage it, and though we know it will eventually wear out, as custodians of this material, we control how fast it wears out.
Sure.
So that's why it's currently off of exhibit, to save it for the future.
Gotcha. And maybe previewing a future episode, if there's stuff that is off exhibit, but it's something that a person would like to see, is there a way to arrange a viewing of certain artifacts?
We would ask them to make an appointment with us, because we can do it for drop-ins. However, we might be working on something else that's a higher priority than someone who walks through the door, unfortunately. That's why we ask you to make an appointment, so we can check what we're doing and then fit you in. Hey, if you come on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we'll be ready for you. And that way we can give you our full attention for whatever you need to research in Howard County history.
So that's the gold treatment right there. You know, it's one thing to just come through and walk through the museum, but if you can actually get time with a curator with the artifact that you're really interested in, I think that would be a pretty fascinating afternoon. But yeah, you're right. We've gotten away from the Colonel and his 11 herbs and spices.
But back to artifacts and what he said: 11 herbs and spices. 6 guys named Herb and 5 Spice Girls.
Is that how it is?
Kentucky Fried Chicken actually follows 11 herbs and spices.
Right. I just assumed there was a Secret Service agreement. We weren't allowed to talk about that.
But we have probably one of the crazy artifacts from Darrell Gillum and his Kentucky Fried Chicken in Kokomo time. At one point, he was having to mix his 11 herbs and spices 2 to 3 times a week to keep up with demand for his chicken at his 3 restaurants. This is well before the stuff came prepackaged. And he would use a small contractor-sized cement mixer to do it. And we have that cement mixer in our collection. Daryl Gillum tells the story of seeing the look on the inspector's face when he came to look at that cement mixer that he used for a food product.
Sure.
Of course, it was never used for cement first, but it's a pretty neat artifact, especially once you learn that he needed so many herbs, so much of this concoction that he had to have a small cement mixer to mix it 3 times a week.
That's some pretty good business. Now, you said he had 3 locations in Howard County. Is it safe to presume that the 2 KFCs that are still in Kokomo are the locations?
Unfortunately, I cannot speak to that because I have not researched that.
All right, people at home, I need to know. If you were around in 1961 or thereafter and you remember going to any of these KFC locations, let us know. Are the 2 that are still in town, is that where Mr. Gillum opened those stores? Obviously, we know the original one is long gone, but it would be neat to know that you're walking into standing history at those 2 restaurants when you go to have your KFC.
So, but Daryl Gillum eventually sold his 3 stores back to corporate and got out of the business. But he was the second ever Kentucky Fried Chicken franchisee. He was the first one east of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
And again, a close personal friend of Colonel Sanders.
We'll take that as a Kokomo first. Now we'll move forward a little bit.
So next in chronological order, does anybody out here like steak? I do. Do you? No, you don't like steak? Okay.
I'm weird.
But Ponderosa Steakhouse, for those of you who are old enough, I'm old enough, I've eaten in one a few times. But Ponderosa Steakhouse was a Kokomo first. My notes here say Dan Lassiter, Norm Weezy, and Charles Kleps founded it in Kokomo. They opened their first restaurant in, looking at my notes again, February of 1966 is when it opened. It was on, I believe, South Home Avenue.
Okay, yes.
I believe it was on South Home Avenue. But he opened it there, and eventually it spread around the United States. They moved their headquarters, though, to, I believe it was Dayton, Ohio in 1971. They were here in Kokomo, but they moved it to Dayton in the early 70s. But Ponderosa did stay in business, and even though it's not nearly as widespread, according to, and I'm going to use Wikipedia as a source, you can get after me if you want, there are still, as of December 2023, there are 13 Ponderosa locations still in business in the United States.
I know as recent as a couple years ago, there was still a Ponderosa in Anderson. I ate there, it's probably about 8 years ago. I don't know if it's still there or not. But I can remember eating at the Ponderosa on Home Avenue, which was right next to where Hacienda is. I think the last thing was in there was an Indian restaurant. I'm not sure if there's something in there now, but they've put a brick front up there, so it's really not recognizable. But I loved going there because they had a buffet.
Yeah, there you go.
I was all about the buffet.
Buffets are always
I was all about
good.
the buffet. Yes. So, steak aside, they had plenty of other offerings. So I was more than satisfied when Mom and Dad said we're going to Ponderosa Sunday after church. I'm like, where's my bib?
There you go.
I'm on it. Yeah. So that was a fun one. And then Bonanza, I see, is listed alongside that. Is Bonanza the same company?
It became part of the same company.
Okay.
Bonanza was actually started by Dan Blocker, who was in the TV show Bonanza.
Oh, okay.
And they eventually linked up and became more or less the same place with different names, like, think Rowley's and Checkers.
Right. I can remember going to the Bonanza there where Cane's is today. That was where the Bonanza was. And
Okay, so it moved then.
where was the Bonanza originally?
It originally opened, I believe, on South Home Avenue.
The Bonanza did?
Or no, not a Bonanza. I'm sorry, Ponderosa.
Yeah. Right.
I'm
We had
getting
two
old.
Ponderosa
I'm getting old.
locations. One is now the Goodwill on West Sycamore, and the other one then was on Home Avenue. But Bonanza was right there at Markland 31. And when I was a kid in the early 80s, I remember loving to go there because they had a tabletop video game version of the stupid video game Gorf, which is frog backwards. But I threw a few quarters into that particular machine. And that would be a fun episode. All in of itself is the number of video game machines you found everywhere in the late 70s and early 80s. Well, but that'll be for another time. We're talking about restaurants here. We just talked about Ponderosa. Dan Lassiter was one of the owners that you listed there. Dan was famous, infamous. He palled around with notables such as Bill Clinton, and was very active in the Florida horse business. He bred and ran racehorses. I don't know if he's still alive today, but as of a few years ago, he was still alive and kicking down in Florida.
Oh, neat.
But I don't think he has anything to do with Ponderosa anymore.
Yeah, probably not. And moving on to the third place, one that you may have heard of. This closed shortly before I retired from the Air Force and moved here in 2007. McDonald's with the diner inside.
Oh, yeah.
Or McDiner, if you will. The first one of those was opened here in Kokomo at the McDonald's on the corner of LaFountain and Lincoln. Mm-hmm. They totally remodeled the store. It opened in 2001. Stayed open for about two and a half years before McDonald's decided to go another direction.
Yep.
Now, ours was the first, but it wasn't the only one. They did one in Tipton as well, and I know they did others around the United States. But it just, for whatever reason, didn't catch on because maybe, even though you could get McDonald's regular menu there, you could get other things like that sometimes we colloquially refer to today as comfort food.
Sure, yeah. Diner food.
Yeah, meatloaf, fried chicken, things like this. But unfortunately, even though newspaper reports, contemporary newspaper reports of the time show that people liked it, and it was popular, at least here in Kokomo, that nationwide it just wasn't doing what McDonald's wanted it to do.
Sure.
And so they ended up closing them and then remodeling it back into its present state.
Yeah. I remember I was managing editor of the Kokomo Perspective at the time, and our staff got an invitation to go to the preview night for that. And the booth seemed a little bit tight, but it did feel homey. It didn't feel like a diner. It felt like a sit-down restaurant, and the food was good. I mean, it was exactly the type of food that you would expect from a diner. But yeah, it seemed odd to order those type of items from McDonald's. I don't know. Right. All of you out there, most of you out there, had an opportunity at some point, I'm guessing, to visit the diner, because in Kokomo, when a new restaurant opens, we're all about it. So I have to assume that there are many of you out there that have a McDiner experience. If you want to share it, if you have a funny story, or if there was a food item you really loved, if you missed this place, or if you thought, man, they're out of their minds, why did they waste the money? Hey, drop us a line. You can get us at KokomoLantern@gmail.com, or you can get a hold of the Historical Society, and we'll take your comments or your questions, and we'll address them in a future show.
And just as a quick follow-up to the McDiner, McDonald's has started another thing called Cosmics, which concentrates on drinks. Right now they've got one store open in Illinois. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that works.
Now, I'm not a big enough McFan to drive all the way to Illinois for.
Neither am I.
But if one of you, because I'm sure there's at least one person in Howard County that's really into McDonald's, if you've made it up to Cosmics, or you are planning a trip, I'd like to know about that too. I think it'd be kind of interesting. If you can bring back a little memorabilia, a picture, or a fun story, maybe we can even have you on the show sometime. So yeah, this is an interactive show, just like all the shows on this podcast network. We want you involved. So if you've got a great idea for a show, if you've got a neat artifact that you think would be interesting to talk about, or if you know something in the museum collection that you would like to know more about, like for instance, there is a wreath made of human hair here at the museum. And when I was 8 years old and made my first trip to the Howard County Historical Society Museum, that just blew my mind, that there was a wreath made of human hair. Obviously, I mean, that was 1978, and I still remember it to this day.
We have 3 of them in the collection.
Oh my gosh. Well, I haven't seen 2 of them. I think I will before I leave today. Don't ask me why. I just think it's neat because it's your history too. We'll see you soon.